My father called me every Sunday evening, at 7 o'clock for 23 years without missing once. Not on Christmas. Not during the ice storm of 2014, when half of Barrie lost power for 3 days. Not even the Sunday his own father died, when he still called me at 7:04, because he said he didn't want me to hear something like that on voicemail. So, when March came and went without his call, I told myself he was still adjusting from the Taya. When April passed the same way, I started calling him. I called 11 times in 6 weeks. He picked up twice. Both times my sister was somewhere in the background. Both times my father sounded like a man reading from a script he hadn't written himself. The third week of May, I drove 2.5 hours south on the 400, all the way from Sudbury to Barrie, and knocked on my father's front door. My sister answered. She opened it about 8 inches and held it there. Behind her in the front hall, I could see cardboard banker's boxes stacked 3 and 4 high, at least 6 of them, white lids on top, the kind you order flat-packed from Staples. She said my father was resting and that he'd asked not to be disturbed. I said I could wait. She said he might be resting all afternoon. I looked past her at the boxes, then I looked at her. I said, "Tell him I came by." I walked back to my truck. I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, watching the front window. No curtain moved. I drove to the Tim Hortons on Dunlop and bought a large coffee I didn't drink, and I called my daughter from the parking lot. She picked up in 2 rings. She was doing her clinical placement at the hospital in Sudbury, and she was on a break, and I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Dad, how long has this actually been going on?" I had to think about it. Too long, that was the honest answer. I need to tell you something about my sister before any of this makes sense. Her name is Wanda. She's 4 years younger than me, and growing up, she and my father were the ones who were close. I was the one who left. I went north to Sudbury at 22 for the fire service, stayed, married, built a life up there. Wanda stayed near Barrie, married a man named Bruno, had kids, showed up to every dinner and birthday and summer barbecue I missed because I was on shift or because the drive felt long after a long week. That part is true, and I own it. When my father had his TA 18 months ago, mild transient, the neurologist said the main lasting effects were in word finding and processing speed. I came down immediately. I stayed 10 days. I arranged home care through the local CCA, talked to his family doctor, made sure he had the telehealth number beside the phone and his OHIP card in the same spot he'd kept it for 30 years. Then I went home because that was where I worked, where my daughter lived, where my life was, and Wanda stayed. She said she wanted to help. She said she'd move her things in temporarily. Bruno was self-employed and could be flexible, she said. I thanked her. I told her I'd come down every 6 weeks. The first 2 visits after that were fine. By the third one, something had shifted. My father seemed quieter than usual, more measured with his words when Wanda was in the room. The home care visits had been canceled. Wanda said she'd stopped them because she was there full-time and they weren't necessary. The house had been reorganized. The hockey card binders were gone from the display case in the living room. I asked my father about the cards. He'd been collecting since the early 70s. Canadians, Leafs, his beloved 72 Summit Series set, and I'd helped him organize the binders when I was 12 years old. We had a system, chronological by set, alphabetical within. He'd kept that collection for 40 years. He looked at the empty case and said, "Wanda's got them stored somewhere safe." I let it go. I shouldn't have. Over the winter, the Sunday calls stopped. By March, when the calls I made went to voicemail, or got answered by Wanda who told me he was sleeping, I started keeping a record. I've kept incident logs my entire career. As a firefighter, you document everything: date, time, observation, action taken. I took out a new spiral notebook, the kind I used to use for shift reports. Green cover, coil bound. I started writing. March 14th, called at 7 p.m., voicemail. March 21st, Wanda answered, said Dad's sleeping. March 28th, received a text from my father's phone. He's having a hard week, please give him space. Not his phrasing, not his spelling, not even close. I wrote it all down. By May, when I stood at that door and got turned away, I had 3 months of entries. The night I got back from Barrie, I sat at my kitchen table with the notebook, and I went back through my memory as far as I could. The last time my father had actually called me, his call, his initiative, without Wanda in the room, was the first Sunday of February. We'd talked for 14 minutes. He'd told me about a Leafs game the night before, about the ice building up on the back step, about a pileated woodpecker that had shown up at the suet feeder for the first time. Normal things. At the very end, almost like an afterthought, almost like he was commenting on the weather, he said, "You still have the key to the shop, don't you?" My father's workshop, the detached garage at the back of his lot, where he'd spent 30 years repairing small engines, building shelves, fixing everything the neighbors dragged over. I'd had a key since I was 16. "Still have it," I told him. "Good," he said, and then he said he had to go and we hung up. I hadn't thought about that exchange since February. Now I sat at my table and I thought about nothing else. My daughter called me 2 days after I got turned away from the door. She said, "Dad, look at Facebook. Go to Wanda's page." I did. Wanda had posted a photo 8 days earlier, a Saturday afternoon. Caption: "Beautiful spring day with the best father-in-law a girl could ask for." My father was sitting in his armchair in the living room, hands folded in his lap, smiling at the camera. He was wearing the dark green flannel shirt I'd given him 2 Christmases ago, buttoned to both wrists. On a day that had been 14 degrees outside. "Look at his wrists," my daughter said. I spread my fingers on the screen and widened the image. The left cuff had shifted maybe 2 centimeters up from the wrist. There was a mark at the joint, a reddened line like a stripe, running in a full circle around the bone. I said, "What am I looking at?" She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, she used the voice I'd heard her use with patients' families during her placement. The clinical calm that means, "I need you to follow this carefully. I can't diagnose from a photograph," she said, "but I want you to look at his neck, his collar." I looked. My father had always been a broad man, wide shoulders, solid through the chest. The collar of the flannel shirt hung loose in a way it shouldn't have. I pulled up a photo from the previous Thanksgiving, 8 months back, and held both screens next to each other. I put the phone down on the table. "I know," my daughter said. The next morning I called Constance Mowat. She's 68 years old. She's lived to the left of my father's house for 19 years. She worked in the ER at Royal Victoria Regional for the better part of 3 decades before she retired. She is the kind of person who notices everything and says very little until you ask her directly. I asked her directly. She told me she hadn't seen my father in the backyard since January. He used to be out there every morning he was able, even in winter, just to clear the back step and check the bird feeders he'd been filling for 15 years. She'd rung the doorbell in February. Wanda answered and said my father wasn't well. She'd tried again in March. That time, Bruno came all the way out to the sidewalk and told her very calmly that my father needed his rest and that dropping by uninvited wasn't helpful to anyone. "I called the seniors' safety line in April," Constance said. I went still. "What happened?" "Adult Protection sent someone to the house. They spoke with your father." She paused. "He told them he was fine, that he was comfortable and there by his own choice. So nothing happened." "No." Her voice went careful. "I worked 30 years as a mandated reporter. I know what I saw through that screen door. But if your father tells the worker he's safe and happy, there's nothing they compel. He still has legal capacity. The law protects his right to make his own decisions." I sat with that. Why would he tell them he was fine if he wasn't? Constance was quiet for a long moment. Then, very gently, "That's the question I've been sitting with since April." I hung up and opened the notebook. I wrote one line, "April protection visit. Dad said he was fine. Why?" That evening, I looked up my father's property on the Ontario Land Registry. He'd bought the house in 1987 and paid it off years ago. I found a listing on a real estate aggregator site. "Coming soon, 3BR Bungalow, Barrie, motivated seller." The listing had been live for 5 weeks. The photos showed empty rooms. The living room furniture was gone. The display case was gone. The framed photographs my father had kept above the fireplace for 30 years gone. Every personal thing he'd lived with since 1987 cleared out. The listing agent was Bruno's sister. I hadn't known she had her real estate license. I called the number. A woman answered. Friendly, professional. I asked about the property. She said the owner was transitioning to a care facility, and the family was hoping for a quick close. Very motivated seller. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat at my table for a long time. Then I opened the notebook and wrote, "Dad never mentioned a care facility, not once." I underlined it twice. I pulled into the Petro-Canada on the bypass. I didn't need gas. I just needed somewhere to stop moving. I had the number for Adult Protective Services on my phone. I'd looked it up 3 times in the past month and closed the screen each time. I kept telling myself, give it another day. Maybe I'm reading this wrong. She's my sister. This time I called. The intake worker was professional and thorough. She asked the right questions. I read from the notebook, dates, times, the photograph, the listing, Constance being walked to the sidewalk. At the end, she told me what I already knew. If my father told their investigator he was safe, there was nothing they could compel. He had legal capacity. I said I understood that. I said, I'm not asking you to make decisions for him. I'm asking you to give him a chance to be heard when my sister isn't in the same room. She said they'd schedule a home visit within 10 business days. I wrote the date in the notebook. 9 days, I went to work. I did my shifts, came home, did it again. I did not call Wanda. I did not drive past my father's house. On the 5th day, I got a call from a constable with the Barrie Police Service named Rafe Okafor. We'd crossed paths over the years through mutual connections in the emergency services community. Not close, but the kind of acquaintance that counts for something. He'd been assigned to accompany the protection worker on the welfare check. He told me I couldn't be there. I said I knew. He said he couldn't search the house. I said I understood. Then I said, when you're in there, look at his wrists, both of them, and look at whether he can get out of his chair on his own. Rafe was quiet. Okay, he said. He called me at 6:30 that evening. I was on my back porch with the notebook open. I picked up on the first ring. He talked for 8 minutes. I didn't say much. The house was clean. A fruit bowl on the kitchen counter, clementines in pairs, the kind of arrangement you put out when company's expected. Wanda had been given advance notice per protocol. My father was in his armchair, dressed, hair combed. He answered the investigator's questions without hesitation. Was he safe? Yes. Free to contact whoever he wanted? Yes. Was he being prevented from anything? No. Wanda sat in the chair by the window the entire time, not close enough to prompt him, just present, just visible. He looked thin, Rafe said, but he wasn't in obvious distress. I closed my eyes. Everett. A pause. When they were leaving, he shook my hand, and he said completely casual, Rafe, do you still go to the Stroud branch? Your dad used to run the Sunday morning breakfasts there. I sat up. Rafe's father had died in 2019 of a heart attack. My father had been at the funeral. He'd driven down the following weekend with a casserole, and stayed most of the afternoon. Rafe's father and my father had both been members at the Stroud Legion branch since the 90s. They'd been in the same Remembrance Day honor guard 4 times running. My father knew Rafe's father was gone. He'd stood at the graveside. Rafe said quietly, Everett, your father is not confused. He knew my dad's name, the branch number, which Sunday he ran the breakfasts. He is completely oriented. He was sending you something. I picked up the pen. I wrote, he's still there. He's still trying. My daughter drove down the next morning. We sat at my kitchen table with both our phones and the notebook between us. She walked me through tie recovery, word retrieval and processing speed affected, but orientation, long-term memory, social awareness, generally intact. Intact enough to know exactly who is in the room with you, and exactly what they might do if you said the wrong thing. He wasn't confused, she said. He was performing safety, and he hid a message inside the performance. I went back to February in my mind, the last real call, the key to the shop. I got up from the table, went out to my garage, found the key on a hook behind the utility shelf. Flathead brass, old, worn smooth on the bow. He'd pressed it into my hand the day I left for Sudbury at 22 years old. In case of emergencies, he'd said, though we never quite defined what that meant. I stood there holding it for a while. I came back inside. My daughter looked at the key in my hand. Are you going over there? No. Why not? Because if I walk into that house without being invited, I become exactly what Wanda is telling people I am. And Dad is the one who lives with that, not me. I put the key in my jacket pocket. 2 weeks later, a registered letter arrived at the Elmwood Street post office. I signed for it on a Tuesday morning. It was from a firm in downtown Barrie. Formal letterhead, precise language. My sister had filed for full substitute decision-making authority over my father under the Ontario Substitute Decisions Act. The grounds, cognitive impairment following ATIA, inability to manage financial affairs. Absence of meaningful involvement from other family members over the preceding several months. That last line. Absence of meaningful involvement. 11 calls over 3 months, most of them to voicemail. One visit where I was told to leave my father's own porch. A text from his phone that he hadn't sent. And now that record of enforced silence was being used as evidence that I hadn't cared enough to show up. The hearing was set for 8 weeks out. I knew enough about Ontario substitute decisions law to understand what a full order meant. It wasn't shared, it wasn't temporary, it wasn't a partial arrangement. It meant my father would lose the legal right to decide where he lived, who he saw, what he signed. It meant Wanda could finalize the sale of the house, break his GC, manage his RRSP disbursements, all of it, without him. It meant what she'd been saying informally would be stamped and ordered by a court. I asked Wanda to meet me. I chose the Kelseys on Mapleview Drive, public, busy enough at lunch that neither of us would raise our voice. She arrived 12 minutes late, ordered tea, and looked at me across the table with the expression she'd had since we were children. Patient, slightly pained, like talking to me was a courtesy she was extending out of obligation. I had the notebook open. I went through it the way I'd go through an incident report, dates, observations, actions taken. I told her I wasn't there to fight. I wanted to see our father. She could be present if she wanted. I just wanted to see him. She reached into her purse and took out her phone, tapped the screen twice and held it across the table. A voice message. My father's voice, warm and clear. Everett, I'm doing fine. Don't be worrying about me now. I recognized every syllable. The particular shape of the way he said now, at the end of a sentence when he wanted you to believe something was settled. I asked what date the message was from. Wanda didn't answer right away, a half beat too long. Last week, she said. He mentions the Senators game. He says it was a tough loss. That game was in November. She pulled the phone back. The silence between us lasted about 5 seconds. 5 seconds is long enough to be a confession. She stood, put on her coat, and left $2 on the table for her tea. At the door, she turned back. You know what your problem is, Everett? You've always been somewhere else when it mattered. You went north and you told yourself it was noble. Meanwhile, Dad needed someone who actually stayed. That's not you. It was never you. She walked out. I sat with her tea and my coffee and the notebook still open on the table. Constance called me on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks later. She'd been reading the Barrie Examiner, the print edition, which she still received and read cover to cover. There was a notice about the Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 147, Annual Recognition Dinner, Caregiver of the Year. Dinner at the branch hall on Dunlop East, the ward counselor attending, remarks from the branch president. The recipient, Wanda. I said, read it again. She did. And then the detail at the end, which Constance read slowly, one word at a time. Mr. Arthur Holgate will be present to present the award to his daughter on behalf of the family. My father, on a stage, handing Wanda a plaque in front of 90 people for taking care of him. I stood in my kitchen, and I sat with that image for a long time. Then I started to laugh, just briefly, because I understood exactly what I needed to do. I wrote in the notebook, she's put him on a stage, she's handed him a microphone. I didn't hire anyone, I didn't set anything up, I did 3 things, all of them completely above board. First, I filed with the Consent and Capacity Board to be recognized as an interested party in my father's case. As his adult child, I had standing. The board granted it within a week. As part of that filing, I requested the appointment of independent legal counsel to assess my father's actual wishes, separate from anything Wanda or I said. Second, I bought a ticket to the Legion dinner, $45. I registered under my full name, Everett James Holgate, no ambiguity. I wanted Wanda to know I was coming. Third, I wrote my father a letter, 1 page, 3 sentences. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. Not because Wanda couldn't intercept it, she probably could, but because a certified letter creates a postmark. It creates a record of when I tried, and I wanted him to have something from me in writing. The letter said, I still have the key to the shop. I'm not going to use it without being asked. I'll wait for you to open the door. My daughter called that night and said she wanted to come to the dinner. I said she didn't have to. She said, I know. I want Grandpa to see 2 people in that room who belong to him. I told her to wear something nice. The independent counsel appointed by the board was a family law practitioner named Margot Ferris, 62 years old, based in Barrie, 24 years doing exactly this kind of work. She interviewed my father at the house. Wanda was present, her legal right as the applicant. The report came to me through the board file, 3 pages. My father presented as coherent, oriented, and able to articulate his own preferences clearly. He expressed satisfaction with his current living situation. I read the additional observations section twice. The subject was wearing a long-sleeved garment during the interview, despite ambient indoor temperature of approximately 22 degrees Celsius. When offered the option of being more comfortable, the subject declined. That one paragraph. I called Margot's office. She picked up herself. I introduced myself, told her I wasn't asking her to take my side. I asked if she'd be willing to attend a public community event as a private citizen and simply observe. She asked what event. I told her about the Legion dinner, about the award, about my father being there with a microphone in his hands. There was a pause. "Mr. Holgate," she said, "what exactly are you planning to do?" I told her I was going to ask my father one question in front of the room. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, the voice of someone who has watched a lot of well-meaning people destroy their own cases with good intentions. She told me that if I made a scene, if I gave Wanda's lawyer anything to work with, the board proceeding would shift. A decision maker looking at a family in open conflict will sometimes simply hand authority to whoever appears more stable. And stable usually means whoever isn't standing up at a Legion Hall causing a disruption. I told her I understood all of that. She asked me what the question was. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. I heard a pen tap against something, twice. "I'll sit at the back," she said. The Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 147 on Dunlop East, seats about 90 in banquet configuration. I know because I've been in that hall a dozen times over the years. My father was a member for 31 years, and I used to come down for Remembrance Day whenever my shift allowed. Low ceiling, warm lighting, faux wood paneling, hung with framed photographs going back to 1951. It smells like coffee and the particular combination of floral perfume and long-dried cigarette smoke that I've associated with Legion halls since I was 8 years old. We arrived at 6:40. My daughter wore her navy blazer. She looked steadier than I felt. Row 4, aisle seat. I could see the full stage from there, a low platform, a freestanding microphone at the center. I scanned the room without appearing to. Constance was 3 rows back on the right side. She caught my eye and gave a small nod. At the very back of the room, near the fire exit, a woman in a gray blazer with a notepad on her knee, Margot Ferris. At the head table, Wanda, Bruno, the branch president, the ward counselor. And my father. He was at the far end of the head table, closest to the aisle. He was wearing his Legion blazer, the navy one with the poppy pin he'd had for 20 years, and his hair was combed. He was sitting straight. He looked like himself. He looked like the man I'd grown up watching sit in exactly that kind of chair, at exactly that kind of table, patient and quiet, and waiting for a room to come to order. Then he turned his head and scanned the room the way you do at any event when you're looking for someone familiar. His eyes found me in row 4, and he looked at me without surprise, without confusion, without the careful blankness I'd seen in the Facebook photograph. He looked at me the way he always had. And my father, who hadn't spoken to me since February, smiled. The program started at 7. The ward counselor gave remarks that used the word community 4 times in 3 minutes. The branch president read the citation for the award. Then Wanda went to the microphone. I'll give her this. She was good at it. I'd never seen her speak publicly before, and she was good at it. She talked about moving in to help Dad recover, about the medications and the appointments, and the nights she'd sat up to make sure he was comfortable. She said family meant sacrifice, and the room believed her because she said it the way you say something you mean. Then she said it. She didn't use my name, she said. Some people only come around when there's something in it for them. I won't say who, but anyone who's been in a family knows exactly the kind of person I mean. She paused just long enough for a few people to glance toward row 4. Then she shook her head slightly, like the thought wasn't worth finishing, and moved on to her closing. A few people in the room smiled. Someone in row 2 leaned over and said something to the person beside them. My daughter's hand found my arm. I put my hand over hers and didn't move. Wanda closed by turning to my father at the head table. She extended her hand. The man who taught me everything I know about what it means to show up for the people you love, Dad. People started applauding before he even stood. Bruno rose to help him. My father accepted the hand, steadied himself, and walked to the stage. 4 steps. He took the lectern with both hands. The room kept applauding. The branch president offered him the plaque. My father took it in both hands. He looked down at it for a moment. The applause faded. He stood at the microphone. He didn't say anything. The room waited. 5 seconds. 7. Someone near the back coughed. Bruno shifted at the head table. Wanda began to rise from her chair, one hand already moving toward the stage stairs. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step forward. I raised my hand the way you'd raise it in a meeting when you have a question and you're waiting to be recognized. The branch president looked at me, uncertain. Do you have one question, I said, for the presenter. The room went still in the specific way. Rooms go still when something unplanned is happening, and nobody knows yet whether it's going to be awkward or serious. I stepped out into the aisle. I stood about 2 meters from the stage. I looked at my father, not at Wanda, not at Bruno, not at the room. At my father. Dad, I said, my voice was level. Is there anyone here who has been deciding what you're allowed to say? 8 seconds of silence. I counted them. My father looked at Wanda. She was completely still. Her expression was controlled, not threatening, nothing you could point to. Just there, just visible, just present. And then my father set the plaque down on the lectern, and he reached up with his left hand and he pulled back the cuff of his blazer. The mark on his wrist was a reddened band, maybe 3 fingers wide, running in a full circle around the joint. The skin was calloused at the edges the way skin gets when pressure is applied to the same place, again and again over many weeks. It wasn't a bruise. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. The room saw it before anyone spoke. I heard a chair shift somewhere behind me. I heard someone pull in a breath. My father pulled the sleeve back down. He picked up the microphone with the same steadiness he'd used for 31 years of Remembrance Day ceremonies. The particular calm of a man who knows how to hold a room when the room needs holding. My name is Arthur Holgate, he said. I was a letter carrier for Canada Post for 34 years. Some of you got your mail from me for a long time. I remember most of your houses. Nobody laughed, not yet. They were waiting. My son asked whether anyone has been deciding what I'm allowed to say. He paused. The answer is yes. The room was completely still. In September, I signed a document. I was 5 weeks out of the hospital, and I was frightened, and I didn't read it carefully enough. That's my own fault. I want to be clear about that. He took one breath. Since then, I have not been able to answer my own telephone. I have not been allowed outside on my own. 3 days a week, when my daughter leaves the house, I am secured to my chair. He said it without drama, the way he used to read the Remembrance Day roll, steady, honoring the weight of the words. She tells me it's so I don't fall. I think she tells herself that too. He looked at Wanda. Wanda, who do you owe money to? You can tell me, I'm still your father. For about 5 seconds, no one in that room moved. Then the back row shifted. Margot Ferris rose to her feet. She spoke clearly, without hurry. I am the independent counsel appointed by the Consent and Capacity Board in the matter of Arthur Holgate. I am an officer of that board. 90 chairs, 90 people turning. Bruno stood up and started saying something about confusion, about medication, about how Dad had been having a difficult week. My father's voice came through the microphone, quiet and final. Bruno, last month you asked me for the access code to my savings account. You said it was to top up the insurance coverage. I gave it to you because I trusted you. I remember what you were wearing that afternoon. Do you want me to continue? Bruno sat down. The ward counselor was on his phone. The branch president stood at the edge of the stage platform, with his hands at his sides, not quite sure what to do with them. Wanda was still at the head table. She hadn't moved toward the stage, hadn't said a word. She was looking at the tablecloth in front of her. Her hands were flat. I understood, watching her, that she'd known this moment was possible, that some part of her had been waiting for some version of it for a long time. Rafe Okafor came in through the side door. He'd been in the parking lot. He looked at Wanda. She looked at him. She didn't run, didn't argue, didn't claim my father was confused, or demand that everyone calm down. She'd run out of those moves, and I think, somewhere in the 8 seconds of silence after my father set down the plaque, she knew it. She pushed back her chair, she stood up, she walked toward the door. I walked up the 4 steps to the stage. My daughter was right behind me. I took off my jacket and laid it over my father's shoulders. He put his arm through mine. I looked at Rafe. He gave me the smallest nod. I said, "She'll go with you. You don't need any difficulty." The legal process took just over 4 months, which is fast by any standard. Here's what actually happened, in plain numbers, because I think you deserve them. The substitute decision-making application was dismissed. Margot Ferris's amended report to the consent and capacity board included specific documentation of the marks on my father's wrists and his public statement at the Legion Hall. The power of attorney my father had signed the previous September was revoked 6 days after the dinner at Margot's office, with his own independent lawyer present. A forensic accountant reviewed my father's accounts. His GIC had been broken early in November, penalty applied. His RRSP had been drawn down through 7 months of withdrawals, totaling $61,000. A civil judgment was entered against Wanda and Bruno jointly for full repayment, structured over 12 years with interest. The criminal charge under the Criminal Code of Canada was criminal breach of trust. Wanda entered a guilty plea to fraud as part of an agreed statement of facts. The sentence was 14 months, suspended with 30 months of probation, and a permanent prohibition against holding any fiduciary position, power of attorney, or trustee role. Bruno received a conditional discharge on a related count. Wanda's bookkeeping business closed in the spring. 3 people lost their contract work. I think about that. I don't believe there was anything I could have done differently, but I think about those 3 people. The Provincial Real Estate Council opened a disciplinary review of Bruno's sister for her role in listing a property, while its owner was subject to an active substitute decisions application. Her license was suspended pending investigation. The first time my father and I were alone, truly alone, no matter pending, no one else expected, was a Sunday morning in October. He'd been staying with my daughter and me in Sudbury while the house situation sorted itself. He'd put on a bit of weight. He was going for short walks in the neighborhood, learning the new streets, commenting on the birches changing color along the creek path. He made tea. We sat down. I'd been carrying a question since well before any of this started. I asked it. "Dad, were you angry that I left when I went north at 22 and didn't come back?" He put both hands around his mug. He thought about it the way he always had before saying something he meant, genuinely taking his time. "Everett," he said, "someone has to go where the work needs doing. Your mother and I always understood that." He looked at me. "People in Sudbury need the fire service just as much as people anywhere else. That was you. That was where you were supposed to be." I said, "Wanda used it every time things got difficult between us, that I'd always been somewhere else when it mattered." He nodded slowly. "I know, and I let her use it because I assumed you already knew the truth of it, and I didn't want to turn it into a bigger argument than it was. I let you carry that for years because I thought you knew. That was my error, not just hers." I wasn't expecting that. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. We sat with our tea for a while. Before I left that afternoon, my father went to the closet and came back holding a key on a plain ring. New cut brass, sharp at the edges, fresh from the hardware store. "I had the locks changed," he said. "This one's for you." I looked at it for a moment. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and I laid the old key on the table between us, the key to his workshop. Worn smooth, flat head, the one he'd handed me at the door of that Barry house 25 years ago when I was 22, and heading north, and he wanted me to know the door was always there. He looked at it. He picked it up and ran his thumb over the worn bow. "I kept it the whole time," I said. 6 months. I never used it." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I got your letter." I hadn't brought up the letter. I hadn't known whether it had ever reached him. He went to the bedroom and came back with the envelope. It had been opened carefully and refolded along the original crease. The fold line was soft and worn, the way paper gets when it has been opened and closed many times. He set it in front of me. I didn't need to read it. I knew exactly what it said, but I looked at it anyway. He slid the new key across the table toward me. I shook my head. You keep that one. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he put the new key back in his coat pocket, and he left the old one on the table between us, and we finished our tea. There's one more thing I hadn't told anyone. Not my daughter, not Constance, not Margot Ferris. After the Legion dinner, after Rafe walked Wanda out to the parking lot, after Margot was making calls near the side door, there were a few minutes where my father and I were alone together in the hall, while everything sorted itself around us. Someone brought him a glass of water. He sat in one of the metal folding chairs near the stage. I sat in the one beside him. I asked him quietly whether he'd received the letter. He didn't answer right away. He took a sip of water. He looked at the stage. Wanda brought it in with the rest of the mail, he said. She read the outside. I think she decided it was harmless. It was addressed to me. He was quiet a moment. She wasn't wrong to think it was harmless. You didn't threaten anyone. Did you read it? I read it 41 times, he said. Plainly, like a number he'd kept track of for a specific reason. I started counting after the 20th. I didn't say anything. When you wrote that you'd wait for me to open the door, he said, that was the first time in months that someone had left a decision to me. Everyone else was telling me things. Telling me I was comfortable. Telling me what I needed. And you wrote that it was my door. That you'd wait. He folded his hands in his lap. I started making a plan that same night, he said. The dinner was 3 weeks out. I needed 3 weeks. I've thought about that a lot. He wasn't waiting for me to come and get him. He was working, carefully, quietly, on his own terms, the same way he'd done anything worth doing his entire life. I just happened to arrive in time to hold the door open while he walked through it. It's February now. My father turned 82 last week. We had a small party at my daughter's place in Sudbury. Constance drove up from Barry. A few people from his old Legion branch made the trip. A woman named Paulette, who'd been his neighbor for 16 years, cried when she hugged him in the doorway. He's back in his own house now. The locks are his. He has a home care worker named Rose, who comes 3 times a week and who he selected himself, and he has already told me he plans to reduce her hours, come June, because he doesn't need that level of help and he'd rather put the money toward a new shelving unit for the workshop. I come down on Sundays. He calls me at 7 o'clock the way he always has, the way he's been doing since before I ever left home. Some Sundays I make the drive, and we sit in the workshop while he explains what he's repairing, and I hand him tools, and mostly I just listen, which is what he always needed from me and what I was always too far away to give. 2 Sundays ago, I pulled up to his house and knocked. He opened the door before I'd finished knocking. He had his tea mug already in hand. He said, "Give me one, 5 across, 9 letters, to manage someone else's affairs on their behalf." I stood on the porch in the February cold and thought about it. He was already smiling. I said, "I'd leave that one blank, Dad." He stepped back and held the door open wide. I walked in.